Bob, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Turn it over to you.
Well, it's nice to be here today. But what is even nicer, look out in the audience and see the students who attended our last year presentations on electing Georgia governor. As Dr. Kay said, this year we plan to explore the lives of Georgia leaders, political leaders during the past 5 decades or so, and begin with Senator Richard B. Russell, who, as you know, was the governor of Georgia and the United States Senator for 38 years. To help us with this presentation, we've asked Earl Leonard Jr. here, who was a staff member of Senator Russell's for many years. He probably knows about as much about his political career and his service in Washington as anyone you can find. And also his nephew, Bruce Russell, who is an attorney from Clayton, who knows about the Russell family, the great Russell family that made so much political contributions to the state of Georgia. These programs will continue, as John said, and each week we will study the life and the career of different Georgians. Next week we'll have Senator Herman Talmadge with a special guest to talk about Talmadge. Following that, we will have 3 of our Georgia governors, living Georgia governors, Governor Sanders, Governor Joe Frank Harris, and Governor Roy Barr. Later on, perhaps next year, we can have our Governor Earl Leonard and Senator Miller as a special guest. But today we've got Richard Russell. I want to talk to you for a few minutes about Senator Russell, a little bit about his early life, his election to governor of the state, and his ascendancy into the United States Senate, where he served the state well for 38 years. And during that period, it's interesting to me that Senator Russell only on one occasion had an opponent. He was elected in 1932 to replace one of our senators who had passed away. 4 years later, he ran again for re-election, and he was opposed by Governor Eugene Talmadge. That was a very good race, 2 well-known Georgia politicians. Senator Russell easily defeated him and went unopposed for the remainder of his political career. I can think of no greater tribute you can pay to a public servant than that. One opponent in 38 years. Richard Russell was born in Winder, Georgia, the son of Judge Richard B. Russell Sr. and Ina Dillard Russell. He was one of 13 children. He came from a very close-knit family that expected all of their siblings to succeed, and they did. Senator Russell, of course, was the eldest son and maybe the favorite of his mother and dad. They raised him very carefully. They saw to it that he was well educated and that he went into public life as they expected him to do and wanted him to do early in his career. As a matter of fact, he ran for state representative the year after he got his law degree from the University of Georgia. He was practicing with his father in Winder. Understand, Bruce, it was Russell and Russell. And they did everything from wills to divorces to land closings and general practice of law. But he ran for the House of Representatives against an opponent who was well established in that area and who had lots of friends and lots of supporters. But Senator Russell declared when he announced that he was going to run a grassroots campaign, that he was going to knock on every door in Barrow County, and he did. And he easily won that election and went to Atlanta, to the State House of Representatives, as the representative of Wyoming County, from Barrow County. It didn't take very long for the people to realize that Senator Russell was a true leader. He became the spokesman for a group of young legislators who had a different agenda. And he knew that the state was crying out at that time for a new brand of leadership. He provided that. He was also ambitious. As soon as it was practical, he ran for the office of Speaker Pro Tem of the Georgia House of Representatives. He won that office and served there. And being Speaker Pro Tem, it gave him an opportunity to preside over the House of Representatives, which gave him a pulpit for the members and the general public to observe. And during that period, he displayed the characteristics that he used throughout his entire career in the legislature, as governor, and in the United States Senate. He was fair, he listened, he heard people's problems, he was a mediator, he could put people together, he could come out with solutions to problems that seemed to be unsolvable. He was a true political leader in every way. So after his term there, as pro tem Speaker of the House, he ran for Speaker. And again, he used his supporters, the young Turks in the legislature, as his foundation for that election. They supported him, they did well, but it took an old Georgia politician by the name of Roy Harris to pull that election through, because the young Turks just couldn't turn out the votes necessary to win. So Harris got behind Russell and convinced the older members that he was the man for the job. So he served as Speaker of the House, youngest in the nation, 28 years old, as I recall. Did an outstanding job, praised by the newspapers. And remember now, you've got to put that period in context. Georgia was a state with 159 counties. Each county had a state representative, at least one. Some had two, and some had more. But the elections were held under what was known as a county unit system. That system assigned various numbers to various counties depending on their population. It was heavily weighted towards smaller counties. Last fall and during the class, we talked about that, and we discussed how smaller counties could heavily outweigh the votes in larger counties. For example, in Union, Towns, and Raven, there were 6 unit votes. Those 6 unit votes were the same number of votes that was assigned to Fulton County, where the population was 20, 30, 40 times more. So it's not really a fair system, but it was a system that was greatly admired by the people in the smaller counties. As you can imagine, when you ran for governor of Georgia, you didn't run one campaign, you ran 159 campaigns, because it was important to get the units in those counties. If you got one more vote than your opponent in that county, you got all of the units. So, elections back in those days were difficult. They were hard. It was hard to campaign. It took a lot of time, it took a lot of work. Senator Russell was elected governor in 1932. He immediately pursued his ideas on what government should be. Good education, good roads, less corruption, and more efficiency. During his term, he accomplished all of those things. There were two things with which he was especially proud. One was the reorganization of government, which he took 102 separate departments, pressed them into, I think, 18. Made the government more efficient, got rid of a lot of way. But one of the things that he was proud of was his creation of the State Board of Regents. There had been scandal and there had been lack of administration among the colleges and universities. And so he created that body which exists today to oversee education in the state of Georgia. Then Senator Harris died while Senator Russell was in office as governor. And he faced a momentous decision. Should he stay home and offer for re-election as governor? Or should he take this rare opportunity to get involved in national politics? Being thoughtful as he was, he decided, well, I will finish my term, but I will appoint someone to succeed him until the next election, at which time I propose to run. And that's what happened. He appointed the publisher of the Atlanta Journal, Mr. Cohen, to the Senate seat, and Mr. Cohen agreed not to run again. Senator Russell could seek the office. Well, normally in a Georgia election like that, when the opportunity arises, you get a number of candidates. But this one didn't draw all those many people. The two majors were Senator Russell and Charlie Crist, who was a state representative, a United States representative from Cordell, and they had a very heated campaign for Senator Russell won the seat and immediately went to Washington. Now, Senator Cohen resigned early, which gave Senator Russell the advantage for seniority over the new senators who were coming in. They weren't due to arrive until March of the following year. And Senator Russell took his seat immediately. And then, at that point, became what I consider to be one of the greatest United States senators who ever lived. Senator Russell immediately went to his to the leader, majority leader in the Senate, and asked to be placed on the Appropriations Committee. Well, those of you who know Washington understand it takes 3 terms before you get a parking place. So asking for a job on the Appropriations Committee was unheard of. But Senator Robinson, who was the leader at the time, appointed him to the Appropriations Committee and launched him on a career that led to most of the major decisions that were made in this country during that time. There are many things that can be said about Senator Russell. What I like to say is that I don't think there has been or there will ever be another United States senator with the power and the influence from Georgia, Senator Richard Russell. He served with 6 presidents. He was close to each. He was frequently sought out for advice. If you go back to, say, the Truman Library, you will find out that Harry Truman talked to Senator Russell almost every day during the times that there were crises in the country. He was close to Senator Johnson, and he served as his mentor. And he's credited with bringing Senator Johnson through the ranks as majority whip and majority leader of the Senate. Now, I can go on and on and on about Senator Russell. But what I would like to do now is to take our guests here who are knowledgeable on Senator Russell's career and his family, and have an informal conversation with them. But to remind you now, if you have any questions during this, raise your hand, and we'll be recognized and answered. Richard, sorry, Earl. Earl Leonard. When I think of Senator Russell, I think of Earl Leonard for some reason. I think it's because he is so knowledgeable in Senator Russell's career that I would naturally turn to him for information about the senator and also the Bruce about his family. That's why we asked him here today. And so, Earl, beginning with you, you knew Senator Russell, spent a lot of time with him publicly and privately. He was a great man, a great senator. Robert Byrd called him a senator. What was it like being on the staff of such a renowned leader?
Well, Bob, it's a great tribute to me that you would say that when you think of Senator Russell, you think of me. I appreciate that. That is high praise indeed. Before I answer your question, I saw when we were coming in some very wonderful old friends from Madison, Georgia. And they will remember this statement when you said that these seminars are heavily weighted toward Democrats because of the fact that Georgia has a very long Democratic history. It reminds me of Madison, where I had lived when I was a young man. Mrs. Roy Lambert Sr. was a Republican. And in 1950, that was not only a rarity or a scarcity, it was unheard of. And my mother would take friends out of town around and show them Madison. They'd say, there's Mrs. Lambert's house. That is her sitting there. And you know, she is a Republican. Looks spotted elephant. Because there was no such thing. What was it like to work on Richard Russell's staff? Well, maybe I should tell you how I got there. I was 24 years old, fresh out of the Georgia Law School. And out of the clear blue sky one Saturday morning, I get a call with no secretary, no intermediary. I was at home. My mother called up and said, there's a long distance call for you. And I picked up the phone and said, hello. And this boy says, Earl, this is Richard Russell in Washington. A big Russell in Washington. And I said to myself, sure, you know. Calls me almost every Saturday. I thought it was a friend of mine who had gone to law school with. He always called and said, this is Winston Churchill. I said, well, hello, son, what the hell are you doing up here? And in those years, Washington was on daylight saving time, and we weren't in Athens. So he said, oh, well, I said, I guess it is 8 o'clock in Georgia. It's 9 o'clock up here. And I had just enough of the voice to know that I had a real genuine, bona fide Richard Russell. I sat up in bed. I said, I'm sorry, son, I just didn't sort of expect a call from you. He said, well, I'm looking for a press secretary, and I was a young man, and I wanted you to come up and talk to me about the job. And I thought to myself, I'll crawl. And I went the following Tuesday, and he hired me. And the reason why, I mean, I'm 24 years old. He's been in the Senate longer than I've been born. The reason he hired me was, he said, I understand from people at the university that you know a lot of young people your age. I said, well, I've been over 7 years, I guess I do. He said, I want you to make me contemporary with people your age. Because I have been up here for so long that the people who put me in Washington are either dead or dying out. And he said, I want to meet and know and be a part of the younger people in Georgia. And that was my assignment, and that's why he hired a 24-year-old press secretary. And it took me about 10 days to realize that I was out to sea. I had lived long enough to do this job. I didn't know what to do about it. I went home one evening late, so Russell worked late in the evening. I got home about 7:30, and I said, all right, we're going to have a conference with you. And so my conscience and I sat down and discussed this issue. And the issue was, you are totally incompetent in the job that you're trying to do. So let's figure out an honorable way out for you. You can go in and say, I measured the job, I measured my qualifications, and they don't meet. Thanks for the show up of the chance. That's honorable. But I decided, no, I'm going to fight it out and go down trying. And I went to see the author of this book, colleagues, John Goldsmith, who was then the chief UPI Senate correspondent. And I said, John, obviously I am a kid, and I don't know what I'm doing. Will you help me succeed? And in those years, the press was reasonably accommodating to young people who asked for help. And he gave me the opportunity to call at any time that I needed some advice, which was frequent. And he got me through that first year and allowed me to succeed. I will always be grateful to John Goldsmith for that hand, which I needed at a very appropriate time. Senator Richard B. Russell was the smartest man I've ever known. He was the best politician this state has ever had. When you stay in the Senate, when you are Speaker, remember how young you was. When you're Speaker of the House in your 20s, and you're still the youngest governor in the history of the state, and you have run through that type of political career that lasted all those years, and you were opposed once, there is a phenomenal, remarkable politician at work. And as a statesman, as a man who put the national interest first, there is no peer, there is no equal. It is a crime that the U.S. Senate today does not boast very many people of the quality of which he was simply the best.
Thank you, Earl. Now, Bruce, where are you from? I failed to mention the credentials of my friend Earl Leonard. He retired as a senior executive from the Coca-Cola Company. Now he is a professor in the school, Terry School of Business at the University of Georgia. Bruce Russell is a lawyer from Clayton, across the mountain, my hometown. And Bruce is the youngest grandson of Judge Russell and a nephew of Senator Russell. So John, Bruce, if you would, would you tell us just a little bit about the Russell family? There were 13 children. Senator Russell was one of 6 boys, oldest of 6 boys, right? 7 boys. Okay.
I'll be glad to. I'm compelled, I want to say, I was born and raised in Winder, Georgia, while Dick Russell was in his heyday. And we scurried the county and couldn't find a Republican. So they were all Democrats. We should have come to Madison and we could have found that one. For you that find the Republican Party affects it, fear not, for now in Barry County you can't find a Democrat. So occasionally when I travel back there. Senator was 4th child of Richard Brevard Russell and Ina Dillard Russell. Judge Russell, as he was affectionately known, when he passed away. He was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Georgia. And while he held that position, he had the good fortune and the pleasure to swear his son in as governor of Georgia. That has not been done in the state of Georgia before or since, and I don't know of any other state in the union where that has taken place. The senator was born, and I would refer to him as Miles Dick, and also as a senator. People of Barry County refer to Dick Russell as the senator. Conscious and different, there were 99 others up there. It was just a common thing. He was such an all persuasive influence that just kind of commanded that sort of recognition. And he was the fourth child of Judge Russell and Ida Miller. And when he was born, his father was a Superior Court judge and served on the bench in Jackson County in Jefferson, Georgia. And my great uncle Lewis, who practiced law at Leonard, rode a horse over to Jefferson to tell the judge that his son had been born. He had 3 previous daughters, and now he had a son that he had relished having. That was in 1897. There were 13 children of that family who grew to adulthood, and 15 more, and 13 that grew to adulthood. And my oldest aunt, born, of course, 3 children before, on the deck, was my Aunt Mary Willie. And she was named Mary William, but they got thinking about that probably wasn't too good a name for a female, so they shortened the William to Willie. And that was my Aunt Billy all my life, my Aunt Billy. Next was my Aunt Marguerite. Aunt Marguerite was my Aunt Ina. My Aunt Ina was there for me. I'm going to run through all these real quick. It'll take about an hour. I'm not going to do that to you. But Bob asked me to let you know something about his family, his immediate family. That's what I want to do. I'm going to mix this up with a little editorials as I go along. My Aunt Ina was next in line. And my Aunt Ina she was a very unique individual too, born before the turn of the century, the same as her older sister and her next 2 siblings. And she attended law school and was a lawyer and worked for the Internal Revenue Service in Washington, D.C. And to show you what a tenacious gal she was, and give you some insight to Russell's personality, she was a woman and they wouldn't let her go to law school. She didn't go to law school, she was female. So she attended the classes and sat behind a podium, or not a podium, but what am I looking for here? Petition. Well, yeah, petition. Some kind of little petition, so that the men in the class couldn't see her and therefore be distracted. And so she did finish her coursework and stood for the bar exam in both Georgia and the District of Columbia, and passed. And she worked for the IRS for some 40 years as a lawyer. Next was my Aunt Marguerite. Aunt Marguerite was a school teacher all across this land. She taught in Georgia, Virginia, and West Virginia. It might not be surprising, a lot of the Russell siblings ended up in Washington, D.C. They followed their brother there, and for various reasons. And so she was there. Next, of course, is Dick Russell was born, and like I said. After that, I can't keep them in order, but I can tell you who they all are. My Aunt Harriet, my Uncle Rob, whose name was Robert Lee Russell, and the people who are native to the South will not be surprised to remember that family name, Robert Lee. Henry Edward, that's my Uncle Jeb, he's a Presbyterian minister. He at one time pastored the largest Presbyterian church east of the Mississippi. I joked with him all the years that I knew him, during his whole life, that Uncle Jeb, you just barely made it. The church was in Memphis. he always thought, he was always amused by that. My Uncle Fielding was a professor at Georgia Southern then College, now University, and was a teacher of Bob Short here. Uncle Fielding was also a very accomplished man. He's the only man in the state of Georgia to have a building on a university campus named for him before he died. That's the Student Center at Georgia Southern University was named for him and dedicated to him, and he was still alive. And that is not yet been accomplished. For some reason, I don't really know why I think that's important, but I'd like to see that stand. My father, Dr. Elliot Russell from Wyman, Georgia. That's the reason I'm the youngest grandson. He and my mother had 7 children, and I am the 7th. And there are 2 granddaughters that are younger than I. I'm the youngest grandson. There are 39 of us. 39 grandchildren, first cousins, some of whom y'all may know. I'll sort that out. My Uncle Walter was a retired colonel from the United States Army. My Aunt Pat, I can only refer to her as my Aunt Pat, and I adored her. She was a wonderful woman. She lived down in a little town named Ada, Georgia, and I spent my summers down there when I was growing up. I think of her very much as my second mother. My Aunt Carolyn Nelson, whose husband was a Presbyterian minister, and they spent 40 years in the ministry. She was a school teacher and played the piano and sang in her husband's churches. And that doesn't sound like any particular great accomplishments, except that she couldn't sing a lick. But she kept at it for 50 years. Carolyn was young. She was born in 1912. My father was born in 1910. He was the next to the youngest. My Uncle Jeff, this is next to there. That's Henry Edward. I'm not sure how they call him, why they call him Jeff, but that was the name. Incidentally, my Aunt Carolyn, I think it's good to say it back, the Chief Justice's youngest brother, my great uncle Lewis Russell, was a lawyer and at a law school in Wyman, Georgia. Now that they have all Republicans there, they don't have a law school. Aunt Carolyn was named for him. Her name was Carolyn Lewis Russell. And because by that time they had decided that Uncle Lewis was strange and was not going to marry him, was going to remain a bachelor all his life, so they started naming their children after him, so he had a namesake. I guess later, when my grandmother's oldest son, the senator, didn't marry and lived a bachelor all his life, she didn't think that was so strange anymore. Then my Uncle Walter, which I mentioned, my Uncle Jeff, my Uncle Fielding, who was the college professor, and my Uncle Bill, who was a farmer and farmed all his life. Finished out his last working years working in the labor department in Athens, Georgia. Very close friends with my father. They traveled all over this country, and most of them worked together. I tagged along or drug along on a lot of those trips, and so very close to my Uncle Bill, and fine, wonderful man. My father, as I mentioned, Aunt Ina, Aunt Marguerite, Aunt Harriet. Aunt Harriet I don't know very well. Aunt Harriet was the 5th child born, and she had rheumatic fever when she was young, and she died of a heart attack when she was just in her 50s, and that was in 1950. And I was only a few years old, so I don't remember much about Aunt Harriet, but her brothers and sisters talked about her so much I feel like I knew her, and I refer to her as Aunt Harriet. Have I named 13 years? They were a very successful, accomplished bunch, and it wasn't expected. It wasn't an tell you one story about that. My Uncle Rob, who was, when he passed away, he was on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And that court convened in New Orleans as it does now. We didn't have the 10th Circuit, which convenes in Ohio. The 5th, Georgia was in the 5th Circuit. And Uncle Rob was a judge on that court. When it came time for his post-secondary school years, he finished high school then, he got around 16 or 17. And he went to a boarding school in Monroe, Georgia, which was about 20, 25 miles away from where the Russells lived in then Jackson County would later become Bear County. And there was a railroad between the two towns of Winder and Monroe. And one weekend, my Uncle Rob just hopped the train and came home and just showed up at the house. And you would think, he's been off at school, I don't know how long he was off, they didn't say, it was always sort of a funny story in the family. But when he arrived there, his mother said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I thought I'd come home." She said, "No, you're supposed to be at school." She put him back on the next train. So that was the importance of education. I must mention that one of Senator Russell's favorite programs was the school lunch program. And it was, he credited that, and it was his idea to do that, to make the school attentive to all of the needs of the children there, and to also remove, at that time, there was a little bit of stigma about, who had a better meal, who brought a better meal, who might have been a little bit ahead of somebody else. And it was his idea that they take that out of the school so that everybody who was in the school would feel the same and have the same classifications. You can go on and on about Senator Earl probably knows all these things better than I. But he was such a respectful man of other people's feelings. And I think that is what made him so great. That he could talk to anybody. It didn't really matter your station in life, or his station. He was interested in you. He wanted to know what your thoughts were. And it wasn't some superficial thing where you stand around and say a few words and pat you on the back and walk off. He really did care about the things that you had to say about things. He could divide his attention like that. That was always amazing the times that I was around him, that how somebody could be talking to him about something and somebody would walk up behind him and he would turn around and call that person by name, ask them how their mother was doing, and call her by name, ask them how their Uncle John was doing, and want to know if that horse he had that was sick last year, how he was doing. Of course, he remembered all this stuff. And that was just the way that he was. And I think a lot of that was not so much just good politics as it was genuine interest in the matters that affected people. And that, to me, is the most memorable thing about it.
Earl, I would like to
Before you, that last point you just made, early on in Senator Russell's career, when he was in the Senate, he was a strong supporter of President Roosevelt, because he believed that when the country was in economic distress, as we were in the Depression, that there was very, very good reason for government to be active and to try things. And as Roosevelt said, well, we're going to try this. If it doesn't work, we're going to try something else. And Roosevelt probably learned more about people and became interested in people when he moved to Georgia, when he would be in Warm Springs, because he was isolated in Hyde Park. But in Warm Springs, he understood when he built his little White House, there was no electricity down there. So he got the idea of a TVA. And the type of curiosity and empathy for other people that Bruce just described as Senator Russell. Roosevelt learned that in Warm Springs. And the people in Georgia who supported him, of which Senator Russell was one, he learned how to be and how to truly be a friend of average people. Roosevelt did from Richard Russell, who had that innate curiosity and empathy for people who were not aristocrats. In the years that I worked for him, Congress usually went out of session. Soon, like about a year from, about this time of year, right after Labor Day, when we would come home. Congress didn't take August recesses in those years. And so being young and single, he would take me to Winder, and we would go to his office in Winder, which was the same law office that he had with his dad. And the window still in the old bank building, Richard B. Russell, Jr., attorney at law. And it was a 3-room office. And that's where we went. So they had the office on the far right, the receptionist or the secretary had the middle one, and I was on the left. And we would stay there and work there from usually from September, October until January, the late part of January, when Congress would go back into session. At lunchtime, more often than not, he would go home and have lunch at home. His cook was an old black lady by the name of Modine, who had served him until she died, and she outlived him. But if he decided not to go home, we went to the drugstore. And we had lunch at the drugstore, sitting on the stoop. And people came in and said, "How are you, son? How are you?" And he knew all about the people. Just as Bruce said, "How's your aunt? How's your whatever?" Just a conversation constantly with the people of Winder. And that is where he was from, and he was proud of that until the day he died. And many of you remember that if you opened up the Congressional Directory, his biography was not some lengthy discourse about all the accomplishments and offices that he had held. His biography was just this: Richard B. Russell, Democrat of Winder, Georgia. All in one. Many of you are in Winder, are passing through, and have never done this before. I would encourage you to go by the Russell family cemetery. The Russell family keeps it open to the public. It's located right behind the old home where the Chief Justice built his home, where all his children were born. And it's his family cemetery, where Senator Russell is buried, where the Chief Justice is buried, where all his children are buried. And some of the best, most beautiful writing I have ever read is on Bless, which marks the grave of the Chief Justice Russell and his wife. And Senator Richard Russell wrote those tributes to his mother and to his father. And they are two of the most beautiful pieces of writing I have ever read. And it's an interesting journey through that cemetery. I think it's your Uncle Philly who has on his tombstone, "Here lies an unfinished man." I think about that from time to time. Go there. You'll enjoy just the moment of being in that cemetery and reading the exquisite writing on that list. Well, you want to ask a question?
There were a couple of things I wanted Earl to ask you. First of all, for you to give us your impression of the relationship between Senator Russell and President Johnson.
President Johnson had a great gift for understanding who could be very helpful to him. He came over to the Senate from the House in 1948. And he at once knew that the man he needed to be closest to was the head of the Senate, not the majority leader, not the vice president presiding officer, but the most respected member of the United States Senate, who was Richard B. Russell. And so he cultivated some Russell in a very obvious way. And Russell saw that this was a young man from Texas with a great deal of talent and a huge amount of ambition. And Russell always, in the back of his mind, I think, he felt that the end of the Civil War would come when the South once again produced a president of the United States. And he saw that Lyndon Johnson had the facilities, had the abilities, had the ambition to go the distance and possibly become president of the United States. And so he invested a good bit of interest and time in Johnson, which Johnson repaid in great measure. And they developed a very fascinating political and personal friendship, which is the subject of this book, Colleagues, which is an outstanding book on that subject. Richard B. Russell and his apprentice, Lyndon B. Johnson. You'll enjoy reading that. It was a relationship that endured through Johnson's presidency, but it frayed and cracked badly during that time over a number of issues, Vietnam being one of them. Not that Russell was opposed to the war. Once the American flag is committed, he will stand beside it until it is taken away. But because he did not believe that you can fight the war with one hand tied behind your back, and that he does not believe that war can be long sustained by the American people unless there is a reasonable exit from it. And that frayed the relationship somewhat, because Russell did not want to continue Vietnam, fought with one arm behind our back. And the second thing that frayed it was some of Johnson's appointments and some of Ramsey Clark, who was then Attorney General's ideas. And it was not the close personal relationship that it had been at the end, though they were continuing. I was in the office one day, and Johnson was going out as president, and he called Russell and said, Johnson called one of his grandchildren, I think it was Lucy's child, little boy. He called him Khrushchev. He said, "Look just like Khrushchev, he had a fat tummy." And so he said, "I'm going to come up to the Capitol today and walk around the Senate and see people." He said, "I think I'm going to bring Khrushchev with me." He said, "Come by your office." They just did. And he said, "Well, you come on up and bring Khrushchev with you." And I didn't know what they're talking about. I said, "Well, what Khrushchev is doing in his life?" And so it was Johnson who was coming up. And one more thing to speak of that relationship. One Saturday morning, I was also working on Saturdays, he wasn't married, so he was in the office all the time. Not to our great pleasure, but he was. Johnson called him. In those years, the vice president did not have Secret Service protection. And he wandered around the Capitol and the Senate office building just as he did when he was in and out of our office a lot. And he called up some of us and said, "I've got something I've got to talk to you about." And it was very, very critical. He said, "I cannot do it in your eyes." And he said, "I'm going to come around, pick you up at the edge of the Senate office building." He said, "You just come out of your office and get into my car, we will be gone." And so Russell hung up the phone, and he said, "I wonder what in the world he has on his mind." He said, "I've never heard a conversation going like that." And so before long, here comes out, I was looking out the window, I said, "He's out there now." So someone got up and went and got the car. And I watched him get in the presidential car, and away they went down Constitution Avenue. And he came back about a little less than an hour later. And I was curious, I knew I couldn't go in there and say, what do you want? Like that. So I went in on another matter, hoping he might tell me. And he didn't say anything. So I said, well, did you have a nice visit with the vice president? He said, well, he had something to tell me about, all right. I later found out that the vice president had taken him out to a place called Haynes Point. The Potomac River, the point that sticks out, and they walked out into Haynes Point, got out of the car. And that's when Senator Russell was advised that the Cubans had put missiles into the island of Cuba. And he was informed of that on that Saturday morning by Vice President Lyndon Johnson. And that was the beginning of what later came to be the Cuban Missile Crisis. So yes, they had a very special relationship, a very personal relationship, a political and personal relationship that endured pretty much the entire time that Johnson was on the political stage.
It is now 1952. Southern Democrats were peeved with the National Party over some of the planks on the platform, began looking for a candidate. Who did they choose? Richard Russell. Do you remember anything about that campaign?
The 52 campaign, of course, I wasn't around then, but Senator Russell said he was just as qualified as anyone that the Democratic Party had to offer the president. So why not try it? And so he did. And he gained a lot of he was considered by some about the days of his regional candidate. And it is true that he enjoyed widespread support of the South. But he had a great deal of support in the West. His campaign manager was somebody, Ed Johnson of Colorado. He had considerable support in the West. And some in the Northeast. Current Connecticut Senator Chris Dodd's father was in the Senate, Senator Tom Dodd from Connecticut. And Tom Dodd, Senator Tom Dodd of Connecticut, supported Richard Nixon. And so he had a national base for his candidacy. And there was no real formal opposition before the convention, because Adlai Stevenson, who was ultimately nominated, was reluctant to run. And so he was being pushed by party bosses, primarily in Chicago. And the basic reason that Senator Russell's campaign did not do better in the convention is because organized labor rejected it. Labor in those years, labor was not as powerful political force today as it was in 1952. But organized labor had a veto over who the Democratic nominee would be in those years. And labor did not find it possible to support Senator Russell. And they did.
Can we now take a 5-minute break? Be back in 5 minutes. The Warren Commission. And the final question was, did Senator Russell ever sign the Warren Commission report?
Senator Russell did not want to serve on the Warren Commission. Johnson had a way twisting your arm. But after Senator Russell had told him that he would not serve on the warrant commission, Lyndon Johnson announced Senator Russell would be a member of the warrant. I was not in Washington when that investigation took place. And so Russell had been ill right around it. But I think he had some very strong doubts about some of the aspects of it. But as I recall, he did embrace the conclusion of it. I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I can add to that. I remember discussing very vividly in the family, and I remember Uncle Ben's comments about it. And Warren, first of all, he didn't like Earl Warren very much. Both of them men are dead now. I don't think it hurts anybody's feelings to let that be known. He was never openly critical of any Warren that I can recall. But he didn't shy back from letting it be known that things that you may have done that he didn't approve of. And he thought that Earl Warren was a hypocrite. And he didn't care much for it. He didn't want to serve on the Warren Commission. He protested. He told the president he wasn't going to do it. The president called him on the phone. Those tapes are now public. You can listen to those tapes now. Told me he was going to do it. And went and announced that he had accepted. And Senator Russell was a very dutiful person. If there was something that he considered was his duty, then it was going to be done. And so when the President of the United States asked him to do something, he did it. Particularly after you told him you wouldn't, and he went and announced it. He would never allow anything that he did to embarrass the President of the United States. It wouldn't matter the party. It just, he would not do anything to embarrass the President of the United States. So he served. Well, at the conclusion of the investigation, they published this, but they brought forth a report, and the report said that there was no conspiracy to kill the President. And Dick Russell wouldn't sign it. He didn't make a lot of noise about it. He didn't leak that to the press. He just said he wouldn't sign it. He said the investigation wasn't complete to the point where they could uniformly make that statement, and that he wasn't going to sign that. And the Chief Justice, Earl Warren, hit the seal. He insisted that the report be unanimous. We recall he had some other things later on that he had similar convictions for. He insisted that the report be unanimous, that everybody agreed with it. And the senator just said, I'm not signing that report in its current form. So they amended it. Earl may remember this now. They amended it that there was no evidence discovered that established that there was a conspiracy amongst a group to kill the president. And with that amendment, the senator agreed to sign it. And that's when he signed it.
Senator Russell was very private. You think if he were alive today, we could see him on Hampton Homes or Hardball with Chris Matthews.
No.
Why do you think that he insisted on such privacy?
Well, I think Senator Russell believed that if your voice is heard on every single subject, then your voice is not heard in the things that you want to get across very important. And he was not available for anyone who wanted to interview him. He was not ready to offer an opinion on everything that came along. He saved his views and his ideas for those subjects that he was considered to be an expert in, as his chairman stood in the Armed Services Committee testified. Senator Russell was not someone who would quit to offer an opinion or a judgment on every single thing that came along, which all too many of today's members of Congress are. That was simply the way he was.
Let's talk a little bit about Senator Russell's view of the world. He opposed the World Court. He had no great confidence in the United Nations. He opposed the Korean War and the Vietnam War, but he supported the president once we got into them. How do you think he would feel about today's world situation?
Thanks, Earl. Well, Bob, you asked a hard question. The first part you asked, how would he think about the current world situation? I think what's more important is how he would react to it. If he was in the United States Senate, I believe that his past affections would hold firm, that the president had committed the American military to a foreign conflict, and I believe he'd be behind that effort 100% as long as the American fighting man was committed. I believe so also that he would be appalled at the idea that someone who expressed a dissenting opinion in that regard was somehow not a patriot of this country. And I believe he would be appalled at the partisan bickering that we engaged in. And to reflect on that, I'm going to tell a little story. When I was a law student in Atlanta and teaching school in Gwinnett County, this story's not about me, I guess I could have left that part out. My brother, who was in the state, in the General Assembly at the time, called me on the phone and said, there's this senator coming into town and he's retiring and he wanted to see where he lived. Will you take him over there to the house? I thought, why are you asking me to do this? He wants you to take him over there. He served in the United States Senate, you served in the General Assembly, and I don't do this stuff, y'all do. But he was busy and couldn't do it, so I went and met with this fellow. He was the most charming man. I'm embarrassed because I can't remember his name. But he was from Oklahoma, Kansas, or somewhere, and he'd served in the United States Senate for many years. He was a Republican, but he was retired. Now, this man was very accomplished himself. He served in the United States Senate. He'd been a leading political leader of his state and his part of the country. And he retired. He wanted to come to Georgia and see where Dick Russell lived. I found that fascinating. Uncle Dick had been dead probably 10 or 15 years by that time. This man could not have served that long with the senators, but there was something about having met him and the impressions he made on him that he wanted to come and see where he lived. He came there. And we walked up on the hill, the cemetery that Earl told you about earlier. And by the way, you're welcome to go there. It is open all daylight hours. We have a caretaker that closes the gate at dark and opens it in the daytime. And the old house is there, and the house is locked up, but you're welcome and free to walk around the grounds, look at it all you like. Look at the tombstones, it's in a family trust, and it's there for your enjoyment if you like. Then we were standing up there on the hill, and he said, I want to tell you a little story about you. He said, me and some colleagues had some little bill in the Senate, and we had this, the Democrats were pushing through this little bill in the Senate, and we knew that Senator Russell was in favor of it. He explained it to me, but I can't remember what it was. But some group of Democrats were put through, and Republicans were organized to filibuster. Now, they claim they don't filibuster, but they do. Well, they did. They don't now, they're in the majority. But Senator Russell, and they said, we've got the votes to vote cloture and push that bill on through. And the senator said, well, no, you don't, because I won't vote for cloture. And they said, well, Dick, you're for this bill. I said, yeah, I'm for it. When it gets to the floor of the Senate, I'm gonna vote for it. And we're gonna pass it into law, but I'm not gonna vote cloture. And he said, well, why? He said, because that's a tradition of the Senate, is to have open debate. And I've been offended by people who closed off my open debate, and I'll not take part in closing it off for somebody else. Now, that's the kind of gentleman he was, and that was the kind of standard of treatment he had for other people. He wouldn't do to somebody else what he didn't want done to himself.
Let me ask you this, Bruce, knowing your background and philosophy. If Senator Russell were alive today, would he still be a Democrat?
I think so, because of tradition. There is a strong tradition of democratic, some people call it rule or control or whatever. I really don't look at it that way. Quite frankly, if we're going to make this transition to Republican in the state, and it certainly looks like we're heading that way, I'm ready to get it on. Go ahead and get it done. Because quite frankly, I like the one-party system in the state. And the reason I liked it is because we made political decisions in Georgia on issues and personalities. And we don't do that anymore. And I think the senator would embrace that. He embraced that. He liked the idea that the people would make their decisions on whether they liked a man or woman who was running for office, if they liked the positions that they were presenting, what their political philosophies and views were. And he didn't take too kindly to the idea that you just got hung with some label because you were associated with some group. I did not know this personally, I'm not old enough, but I read that he didn't like much when he ran for the Senate, in one of those races, I think maybe the one where he was opposed by Governor Townsend, that the political rallying cry in Georgia was Roosevelt, Russell, Reeves, and Rivers. That was the man running for president, Senate, governor, and Secretary of Agriculture. If I remember that right,
I think so.
Bob's a historian. And he didn't like much of that, but he didn't much want to associate his candidacy with anybody else. And if he ever gave any political advice to anybody, I can't recall many times he gave it, but my father ran for political office, and my cousin Bobby ran for political office, and he was, of course, alive and around when that was going on. And his advice on every occasion was, run your race and leave everybody else's alone. And and so I believe he would be a Democrat. You mentioned earlier about, Earl mentioned about his sentiments about a depression. His favorite saying in politics was that I'm a conservative when times are good and I'm a liberal when times are bad. He was not offended by the idea that government could help. He was very much opposed to the idea that government can do everything. Was not for that, and opposed on almost every occasion.
Let's not forget Lady Russell, whose husband became governor of Georgia. I refer, of course, to Betty Vanderbilt. She was what, your cousin?
She was my first cousin.
May I ask this question? On Senator Russell's death, I believe in 1971, the office, of course, was vacated. In such circumstances, the governor had the opportunity to appoint his successor. I happened to be on the scene at the time, and I happened to be a great fan and former employee of Governor Vanderbilt, who I thought was one of the greater politicians that I ever known. thought that he would get that appointment, but he didn't. Instead, President Carter appointed Trinity as David M. Rudd, who was an able man, to that position. But what was the reaction of the Russell family at that time?
Ernie Vandiver thought Jimmy Carter had promised to appoint him with some help that Vandiver delivered on during his campaign for governor. And so the reaction of those Russells who knew that was one of disappointment. I can't say we were surprised, but we were disappointed. We were pulling for Ernest Vandiver to be a senator from Georgia, not to succeed Senator Russell. I think I can safely say I'm very reluctant to speak for the Russells. We're a big crowd, and we got but I think I'm safe to say that we never felt like that Senate seat belonged to Dick Russell. I know he didn't believe that, and I don't believe it, and I don't know many Russells who did. That seat belongs to all of y'all. It belongs to the people of the state of Georgia. In that way, I own just a little piece of it. But that's who that seat belongs to. But we knew that Ernie Vandiver was a good man and would have fulfilled that seat well, and that we had hoped that he would get that appointment, and we were disappointed we didn't get it.
How did the senator react to the fantastic changes that came with integration in the early 1960s? Did he, as a Southern Democrat, did he oppose it either outwardly or inwardly, intellectually, or did he go with the flow in those days?
He opposed most of those measures that were eventually passed into law. In every instance, on constitutional grounds, we felt like that a lot of that effort, albeit to much benefit to this country now, was beyond the constitutional authority of the federal government. And for those reasons, he opposed most of those measures.
And he felt that the courts had overreached rather substantially.
It's important to remember, I think, that during that period, the civil rights question was one that had been put on the back burner for years, suddenly erupted. And there were many, many propositions there that some people felt infringed upon the rights of businessmen and property owners and local governments. So Senator Russell argued, and I have heard his argument. And I can tell you that while I was never opposed to racial equality, I can understand his arguments about the constitutionality of some of those issues that were brought up at that time. Gentlemen, I appreciate your being here. You've been very enlightening, I'm sure. Are there any questions back here?
Generally, a mother has great influence on her children. Do you have any illustrations or family stories about your grandmother and how she may have treated or told her children anything?
Oh, so many.
Just one.
We don't have near enough time to tell all of those. I'll tell you what I will do, and I think maybe you may have mentioned it to me earlier. My grandmother was a great letter writer. She wrote some 2,000 letters during her life, and she wrote many of those to her children, and they saved those letters. And those letters ended up in a book called Roots and Evergreen, the edited letters of Anna Dillard Russell. That book was edited Sally. And besides being just a wonderful example of human interest, it's a good chronologically of the history of the state of Georgia during that era. And she did have tremendous influence on all of her children, and certainly, probably more so than any of those, Senator Russell. I heard what Bob said earlier. I don't know that he was the favorite, in that he was somehow favored. I think maybe he was the favorite in that he was burdened with the responsibility of carrying on the name of a very, very ambitious man, and that was my grandfather, Richard McCord Russell Sr. And she did instill in Dick Russell the importance of fulfilling that responsibility. If you'll read some of those letters, you'll see that in there. And there's one in there when she fussed with him. Now, if I got time to do this, Bob?
Sure.
I'll tell about this one letter. There was some when Judge Russell was running for governor, and my grandmother's people were Methodists and non-drinkers, and the judge had taken the position politically that each individual county should be able to decide if alcohol would be sold in this county. And the Methodists, of course, were temperists, and they didn't think you should have alcohol anywhere in sight, smell, or in any form at all. Now, that might sound like a benign issue today, but it was big politics in Georgia around the turn of the century. The idea that somehow alcohol could be consumed legally. I've never heard of such a thing. So this one of my grandmother's cousins was a temperist in the Methodist faith, and she was out campaigning for Governor Brown, who was the leading candidate in the race. And Uncle Dick, who was a young lawyer in Wyoming at the time, wrote an editorial in the local paper critical of her, and even asked his mother if she couldn't talk to her and tone her down a little bit. I always thought said he was smart. So she pondered that a little bit, and she wrote him a letter. An excerpt from that letter is in that book, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it was to this effect. Across this state are men and other people involved in politics who have been critical of you and your father and everything you've stood for. And now that he's running for governor, y'all act like they're y'all's best friend. And you'd have me write my cousin, whatever her name is, and criticize her for a position that you are now offended by. And I thought that was just a wonderful expression of how she explained that to them.
Well,
Were there ever any close or near misses on marriage for Dick
Yes,
Russell?
there was. Senator, in fact, was engaged to a lady, and it didn't take place. And that's a long story, but I don't know. I'll let somebody else tell that story sometime.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it seems that Senator Russell's opposition to the 1964 Civil Rights Act was very similar to Barry Goldwater's, on constitutional grounds and not on racial grounds.
Very simple.
Did Senator Russell play an active role in Lyndon Johnson's 1964 election to the presidency?
He would certainly have supported it. I don't know of any active role he took part in. He worked very strong for Kennedy in Georgia in 1960 because he was
Right.
fearful that Kennedy would not carry Georgia.
Right.
He was very worried about that. I remember my Aunt Ina explaining to him. My Aunt Ina was a little short lady, about 5'2", and such a very tall man. And Aunt Ina standing on the back porch at the big house. That's that house that's at that family cemetery. Standing up on the porch part, and Uncle Dick standing down on the ground, and she pointing her finger at him, explaining to him why she voted for Richard Nixon in 1960. I was astounded when she got through, that he looked up at her, and I was expecting some diatribe, you know. He looked up at her and he said, I'm afraid there's 180,000 Georgians in about 6 months are going to agree with you.
In 1964, Governor Carl Sanders of Georgia managed the Johnson campaign in the state of Georgia. Senator Russell was on a foreign relations trip to Spain. You know, of course, that President Johnson lost Georgia, and Senator Russell had what I thought was a very appropriate, cute response when some reporter asked him about it. He said, the reporter said, Governor Sanders noticed that you were in Spain during the election and weren't here to support the ticket. To which Senator Russell quickly responded, it looks like he's the one that should have gone to Spain.
Did he support Hubert Humphrey?
Pardon?
Did he support Hubert Humphrey in view of the fact, Senator Russell, in view of the fact that George Wallace was also running for president in '68?
Yes, he voted Democrat in that election.
Okay.
I think Senator Russell
Always supported Humphrey.
always going to get a Democratic ticket. Now, support, I don't know your definition.
Well, voted.
But Senator Russell had what I call oops. You don't fool around with other people's politics, because that's a no.
He always supported, with various degrees of enthusiasm, the Democratic nominee.
Right.
Always.
Okay.
And Bruce talked about
Senator Russell.
Because Anna was she was one of my very favorite people of all time. She was simply wonderful. And the greatest Miss Anna Stacy stories I remember was that when she was 90 or in her early 90s, she bought a new car. Remember that one?
He did walk out with the Dixiecrats when they separated from the Democrats. Did he not?
No, he did not.
He did not, he wasn't.
He didn't support strong Thurman for president.
He was drafted by the Dixiecrats and refused the
That's what I was thinking.
election.
That's right.
And then Governor Strom Thurmond from South Carolina was then drafted by him to run for president.
I have a couple of questions. How did Senator Russell get along with the two Republican presidents, Dwight Eisenhower and Richard Nixon? And also, what was his impact on state politics after he went to Washington? Did he have any, or did he care? Or, you know, he was in the Senate a long time, and we had a lot of governors in there, and some of them were good, some of them were mediocre. But what was his feeling for the state of Georgia and the internal politics here, and also the, what his relationship with those two presidents? And by the way, if you talk about the liquor issues here, talk about Union County last week.
Oops, that's a oops.
I didn't hear that, Bob, and I don't think I wanted to hear it.
Got along extremely well with Dwight Eisenhower and with Richard Nixon. Of course, when he died, Nixon was in office and came to Atlanta to view his body, which laid in state in the state capitol, and had very kind and complimentary remarks about Senator Russell at that time. His relationship with General Eisenhower was historic and very close, and there were frequent visitors. General Eisenhower invited down for the Jack Daniels in the afternoon at the White House, and he went, and they discussed many issues. They had a great deal in common, and but he had a very nice relationship with Richard Nixon. And the second part of your question.
What was his relationship as a senator to the internal politics here in Georgia, which was all Democratic, of course, until this recent year?
He did not involve himself very much in Georgia politics after he made the Senate. He says that he could have, been a kingmaker like some other people in the Senate who remained extremely active in their states in terms of the state politics, bosses, if you will. But Senator Russell didn't do that. He tended essentially to his own politics and did not try to be a kingmaker or anything like that in the state.
I think you just answered the question, but I was wondering if he was involved in the brokering the deal between Johnson and Kennedy in the Democratic Convention. And Johnson was chosen as Kennedy's running mate.
Not to my knowledge.
Other questions? Thank you, gentlemen. That's more applause than Bobby Bonds gets when he gets the whole run. Before we go, let me remind you now that next week, if you've seen local papers and the picture of Senator Russell and his article about Senator Townsend, you'll know that next week the subject will be Senator Herman Townsend and his career in Georgia politics and in the United States Senate. So I hope to see all of you back here next week, same time, same place.